Some secrets are too dangerous to keep, and some families hide things that should never see daylight. What I discovered 3 days before my daughter's wedding would force me to choose between her happiness and her safety. My name is Emily Foster, and for 25 years I've been creating perfect wedding days for couples who trust me with the most important moment of their lives. I've orchestrated celebrations for tech billionaires in Napa Valley, politicians in Washington, D.C., and celebrities who needed absolute discretion. My reputation for managing complex family dynamics and keeping dangerous secrets has made me the wedding planner that powerful families call when they need someone who understands that not every family celebration is built on love and joy. But nothing in my professional experience prepared me for what I would discover about my own daughter's wedding. The story begins 6 months earlier when my daughter Jasmine announced her engagement to David Kensington during a family dinner at my house in Piedmont, California. I had met David several times over the 2 years they had been dating, and he seems like everything a mother could want for her daughter. He was intelligent, respectful, and clearly devoted to Jasmine. He worked as a financial analyst at a prestigious investment firm in San Francisco, drove a modest car despite his family's obvious wealth, and treated my daughter with the kind of gentle attention that suggested genuine love rather than casual interest. The Kensington family owned a pharmaceutical company that had been successful for 3 generations, and David's trust fund could have supported a lifestyle of casual luxury if he had chosen it. But he lived simply, worked hard, and seemed genuinely committed to building a life with Jasmine based on shared values rather than inherited privilege. When they announced their engagement, I was genuinely happy for them. Jasmine had been through enough disappointment in her previous relationships to deserve someone who valued her intelligence, her kindness, and her fierce independence. David seemed to understand that my daughter was not someone who could be controlled or diminished, and he appeared to love her strength rather than fear it. The first sign that something was unusual about the Kensington family came when David's mother, Catherine, called to discuss wedding planning arrangements. "Emily," she said during our initial phone conversation, "David has told us that you're a professional wedding planner. How convenient that Jasmine's mother happens to work in the industry." There was something in her tone that suggested she saw my profession as service work rather than creative expertise. But I dismissed it as the kind of casual condescension that wealthy people sometimes display without conscious intent. "I've been planning weddings for 25 years, I replied. "I'd be happy to help create something beautiful for David and Jasmine. Actually, we were thinking it might be better to use a planner who specializes in events of this magnitude. We have some specific requirements that might be beyond the scope of what you normally handle." The magnitude comment stung, but I maintained my professional composure. "What kind of requirements are you thinking about?" "Guest list management for high-profile attendees, security considerations, media coordination, the kinds of details that require experience with prominent families." I had managed weddings for Supreme Court justices, Fortune 500 CEOs, and entertainment industry leaders. The idea that I couldn't handle the Kensington family's requirements was both insulting and puzzling. "Mrs. Kensington, I understand your concerns about quality and expertise. Perhaps we could meet in person to discuss the specific challenges you're anticipating." "That won't be necessary. We've already retained Wellington Events to manage the coordination. I'm sure you understand that this isn't personal. It's simply a matter of ensuring that everything meets our standards." The conversation ended politely but definitively. The Kensington family had decided that I wasn't qualified to plan my own daughter's wedding. When I told Jasmine about the conversation, her reaction was immediate and fierce. They did what? She said, her voice rising with indignation. They hired a wedding planner without even asking us what we wanted? Apparently, they have specific requirements that they don't think I can handle. What requirements? It's a wedding, not a military operation. Requirements related to high-profile guests and security considerations. Jasmine was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of her future in-laws' decision. Mom, this isn't about your qualifications. This is about control. They're establishing that they make the decisions and we follow their lead. She was right, of course. The wedding planner decision was a power play designed to demonstrate that the Kensington family would determine how the celebration would be managed and who would be trusted with important responsibilities. What do you want to do? I asked. I want to fight this. But David is already stressed about family tensions, and I don't want to create more conflict before we're even married. So you're going to let them plan your wedding? I'm going to pick my battles. The wedding is one day. The marriage is the rest of my life. It was a mature decision, but it left me feeling frustrated and concerned about the dynamic that was being established between Jasmine and her future in-laws. Over the following weeks, I watched Wellington Events take over the planning process with military precision and corporate efficiency. They scheduled venue tours, vendor meetings, and design consultations without involving Jasmine in meaningful decision-making. Instead, she was presented with options that had been pre-selected by Catherine Kensington and asked to choose among alternatives that all reflected the same aesthetic preferences and budget considerations. The wedding was being planned for 300 guests at the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, with a reception that would feature a sit-down dinner, live orchestra, and dancing that would continue until midnight. The budget was substantial, but not unlimited, and every expense was being carefully managed to create maximum impact for the investment. Wellington Events was competent but impersonal, treating the wedding as a logistics challenge rather than a celebration of love between two specific people. The flowers, music, and menu were selected based on what worked well for similar events, rather than what reflected Jasmine and David's personalities or preferences. But what bothered me most was watching Jasmine gradually surrender her own vision for her wedding day. She had initially talked about wanting something intimate and personal, maybe a destination wedding with close family and friends. Instead, she was getting a formal society event designed to meet the Kensington family's expectations rather than her own dreams. "Are you happy with how this is going?" I asked her during one of our regular coffee meetings. "I'm happy that David is happy. His family has very specific ideas about how things should be done, and it's easier to go along with their preferences than to fight about details that don't really matter." "Do they matter to you?" "Some of them do, but I've realized that getting married isn't just about David and me. It's about joining a family that has traditions and expectations. I need to respect that." I recognize the language of compromise and accommodation that women often use when they're learning to navigate complex family dynamics. Jasmine was choosing harmony over personal preferences, which was admirable, but also concerning. What does David think about his family's management of the planning process? He's grateful that his mother is handling the details. He says planning events isn't his strength, and he trusts her judgment about what will work best. And what about your judgment? My judgment is that I want to marry David, and I want his family to like me. If that means accepting their ideas about wedding planning, then that's what I'll do. It was a reasonable approach, but it left me feeling uneasy about the power dynamics that were being established before the marriage had even begun. My concerns deepened when I learned more about the guest list and the political considerations that were influencing the wedding planning decisions. Richard Kensington, David's father, was apparently considering running for political office in the next election cycle. The wedding was being planned partly as a networking opportunity that would allow him to connect with potential donors and supporters in a social setting that would facilitate relationship building without the formal constraints of political fundraising events. It's brilliant, actually, Catherine explained to someone during a phone conversation I accidentally overheard while visiting Jasmine's apartment. We'll have 300 of the most influential people in Northern California celebrating our family, and Richard can make connections that would take months to develop through normal political channels. The wedding was being used as a campaign event, which explained the guest list management, security considerations, and media coordination that Catherine had mentioned during our initial conversation. It also explained why they needed a wedding planner with experience managing political events rather than someone who specialized in personal celebrations. But it raised questions about whether David and Jasmine's wedding was primarily about their marriage or about Richard Kensington's political ambitions. I decided to do some research about the Kensington family business and political connections. What I discovered was both impressive and concerning. Kensington Pharmaceuticals have been extraordinarily successful over the past decade, developing several breakthrough medications that had generated billions in revenue and established the company as a major player in the biotech industry. Richard Kensington had used that success to build a network of political relationships that positioned him as a potential candidate for governor or senator. But the company had also been involved in several controversies related to drug pricing, patent manipulation, and marketing practices that had generated regulatory scrutiny and public criticism. Richard Kensington had successfully managed these controversies through strategic lobbying, charitable contributions, and public relations campaigns that had largely protected the family's reputation. The wedding was apparently part of a broader strategy to enhance Richard's public image and demonstrate his commitment to family values and community leadership. Having 300 prominent guests celebrate his son's marriage would provide valuable social proof of his respectability and character. None of this was necessarily problematic, but it made me realize that Jasmine was marrying into a family that operated at levels of complexity and scrutiny that she might not fully understand. I decided to have a candid conversation with David about his family's approach to the wedding planning and their apparent use of the celebration for political networking. "David," I said during a private lunch meeting, "I want to make sure that you and Jasmine are comfortable with how the wedding planning is progressing. I think everything is going great. My mother is incredibly organized, and Wellington Events has everything under control. I'm more concerned about whether the wedding reflects what you and Jasmine actually want for your celebration." "What do you mean?" "I mean that it seems like the guest list and event design are influenced by your father's political considerations rather than your personal preferences." David was quiet for a moment, considering how to respond to my observation. "My family has always approached important events strategically. That doesn't mean the wedding isn't about Jasmine and me." "But it does mean that your celebration is serving multiple purposes, beyond just celebrating your marriage."
Is that necessarily bad?
It's not bad, but it's something that Jasmine should understand and be comfortable with. She should know that her wedding is being used partly as a political networking event.
She knows that my father is considering running for office and that some of the guests will be political contacts.
Does she know that the wedding is essentially a campaign event?
David's expression changed slightly, suggesting that I had touched on something he hadn't fully acknowledged to himself. It's not a campaign event. It's a wedding that happens to include some people who might be helpful to my father's political ambitions.
David, I've planned political fundraising events. I know what they look like. Your wedding has many of the same characteristics.
What are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting that you have an honest conversation with Jasmine about the multiple purposes this wedding is serving, so she can make informed decisions about her level of comfort with those purposes. The conversation ended cordially, but I could see that David was uncomfortable with my questions about his family's motivations and methods. 2 weeks later, Jasmine called me in tears. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something that happened today." She came to my house that evening looking upset and confused, in a way that suggested she had learned something that challenged her assumptions about her future in-laws. "What happened?" I asked. "I went to David's apartment this afternoon to pick up some wedding RSVPs that had been sent to his address. He wasn't home, but he had left the door unlocked for me. While I was looking for the RSVPs, I found a folder on his desk labeled Wedding Strategy." She paused, clearly struggling with whether to continue. I know I shouldn't have looked at it, but the title made me curious. It wasn't wedding planning documents. It was a detailed analysis of the guest list, organized by political affiliation, donation history, and influence networks. What kind of analysis? Lists of potential donors to Richard's campaign, with notes about their business interests, policy preferences, and personal relationships, strategies for using the wedding reception to facilitate specific introductions and conversations, talking points for Richard to use when discussing his political ambitions with different guests. Was David involved in creating these documents? I don't think so. The folder had Catherine's initials on it, and the writing style sounded like political consulting rather than David's normal way of communicating. What did you do with the folder? I put it back exactly where I found it, but I can't stop thinking about what it means that my wedding is being used as a political strategy session. Jasmine was discovering what I had suspected for weeks, that her wedding was serving purposes beyond celebrating her marriage to David. The question was whether she could accept that reality or whether it would change her feelings about the marriage itself. "How do you feel about this information?" I asked. "I feel manipulated. I feel like I've been participating in something that I didn't understand and didn't consent to." "Have you talked to David about what you found?" I tried to bring it up indirectly, but he seemed uncomfortable discussing his family's political activities. He said that his father's business and political interests were separate from our relationship. Do you believe that? I want to believe it, but it's hard to separate them when our wedding is apparently part of his father's political strategy. We talked for 2 hours about the implications of what she had discovered and her options for addressing her concerns. She could confront David directly about the political aspects of the wedding. She could ask Catherine for a frank discussion about the guest list and networking objectives. She could accept the situation and focus on the aspects of the wedding that were genuinely about her marriage. Or she could consider whether the political manipulation of her wedding was symptomatic of larger issues with the Kensington family's approach to relationships and decision-making. "What do you think I should do?" she asked. "I think you should have an honest conversation with David about your concerns and see how he responds. His reaction will tell you a lot about his priorities and his willingness to protect your interests when they conflict with his family's agenda. And if he chooses his family's agenda over my concerns, then you'll have important information about what kind of marriage you're entering." The conversation with David did not go well. When Jasmine asked him directly about the political aspects of their wedding planning, he became defensive and dismissive of her concerns. "Jasmine, you're overthinking this. Yes, my father has political ambitions. And yes, some of our wedding guests will be people who might support his campaigns. But that doesn't change the fact that we're getting married because we love each other. But it does change the meaning of our wedding. It makes our celebration about your father's political advancement rather than about us. Why can't it be about both? Because I didn't agree to have my wedding used as a political event. I thought we were planning a celebration of our marriage, not a campaign fundraiser. You're being dramatic. It's not a campaign fundraiser. David, your mother has a folder labeled Wedding Strategy that contains detailed analysis of guest political affiliations and donation potential. How is that not campaign-related activity? David's reaction to learning that Jasmine had seen the strategy documents was telling. Instead of being concerned about his mother's manipulation of their wedding, he was angry that Jasmine had discovered information that wasn't intended for her. "You went through my personal papers?" "I found the folder by accident while I was looking for wedding RSVPs, but that's not the point. The point is that your family is using our wedding for political purposes without telling us. My family is using their resources to create a beautiful wedding for us while also maintaining their professional relationships. I don't see the problem. The problem is that I'm not comfortable with my wedding being used as a networking event for your father's political career." "Then what do you want to do about it?" "I want you to talk to your parents about scaling back the political aspects of the guest list and focusing on celebrating our marriage." "I'm not going to ask my parents to change their guest list because you're uncomfortable with their business relationships." The conversation ended with David defending his family's decisions and Jasmine feeling more isolated and concerned about the dynamics she was marrying into. She called me that night to report on the discussion and ask for advice about her next steps. "He's not going to protect me from his family's agenda," she said. "He sees their political use of our wedding as normal and acceptable." How do you feel about that? I feel like I'm learning something important about David's priorities and loyalties. When forced to choose between his family's interests and my comfort, he chose his family. What do you want to do?
I don't know. I love David, but I'm starting to wonder whether I can trust him to prioritize our marriage over his family's expectations. It was a crucial realization that would influence everything that happened over the following weeks. Meanwhile, I was dealing with my own growing concerns about the Kensington family and the implications of Jasmine's marriage to David. As a wedding planner with 25 years of experience, I had developed instincts about family dynamics and relationship problems that often proved accurate. The Kensington family's behavior was raising red flags that I couldn't ignore. The manipulation of the wedding for political purposes was concerning, but not necessarily disqualifying. Many wealthy families used social events to advance business and political interests. But the secrecy and deception around these purposes suggested a level of manipulation that could extend beyond wedding planning into other areas of family life. I was also troubled by David's response to Jasmine's concerns. His immediate defense of his family's agenda and his unwillingness to consider her perspective suggested that he had been trained to prioritize family loyalty over individual relationships. I decided to do more extensive research about the Kensington family, their business practices, and their political activities. What I discovered over the next 2 weeks would change everything. Kensington Pharmaceuticals had indeed been successful, but their success had been built partly on business practices that were ethically questionable and potentially illegal. The company had been involved in price manipulation schemes, patent fraud, and kickback arrangements with healthcare providers that had generated enormous profits while driving up healthcare costs for consumers. Richard Kensington had managed to avoid serious legal consequences through strategic political contributions, regulatory capture, and sophisticated public relations campaigns that had protected the company's reputation despite mounting evidence of misconduct. But more troubling were the personal allegations that had been made against Richard over the years. Several former employees had filed complaints alleging workplace harassment, intimidation, and retaliation for reporting ethical concerns. A former business partner had accused Richard of fraud and breach of contract in a lawsuit that had been settled out of court with strict confidentiality agreements. Most disturbing were allegations made by a former household employee who claimed that Richard had a pattern of inappropriate behavior toward young women who worked for the family. The allegations had never resulted in criminal charges, but they had been documented in a civil lawsuit that was also settled with confidentiality provisions. The pattern that emerged from my research was of a man who used wealth, political connections, and legal intimidation to avoid accountability for behavior that ranged from unethical to potentially criminal. I was particularly concerned about the allegations of inappropriate behavior toward young women, given that Jasmine would be joining this family and potentially working for the family business after graduation from law school. But I faced a difficult dilemma. The information I had discovered came from public legal documents, news reports, and business filings, but much of it involved allegations that had never been proven in court. Sharing this information with Jasmine could destroy her relationship with David based on unproven claims about his father's conduct.
On the other hand, not sharing the information could leave her vulnerable to a family that had a documented history of manipulation, retaliation, and potentially predatory behavior. I decided to approach the problem strategically. Rather than making accusations about Richard Kensington's character, I would present Jasmine with factual information about the family's business practices and legal history and let her draw her own conclusions about the implications for her future relationship with them. Jasmine, I said during our next coffee meeting, I want to share some information I've discovered about the Kensington family's business activities. I think you should be aware of these issues before you make final decisions about your wedding and your marriage. What kind of information? Information about Kensington Pharmaceuticals' business practices and some legal issues that Richard has been involved with over the years. I presented her with copies of news articles, SEC filings, and court documents that detailed the company's controversial business practices and Richard's personal legal problems. I was careful to stick to documented facts rather than speculation or unproven allegations. Jasmine reviewed the materials with the analytical skills she had developed in law school, asking sharp questions about the sources and legal implications of what she was seeing. Mom, some of this is really concerning. If even half of these allegations are true, Richard is someone who uses his wealth and power to avoid accountability for seriously problematic behavior. What concerns you most? The pattern of retaliation against people who challenge him or report problems. If I marry David, I become part of this family. If I ever have concerns about their business practices or personal conduct, will I be able to speak up without facing retaliation? That's exactly the question you should be asking. And the allegations about inappropriate behavior toward young women. If those are true, then I could be at risk simply by being part of the family.
Have you ever felt uncomfortable around Richard?
Not exactly uncomfortable, but he does pay attention to me in ways that feel a little too personal. Comments about my appearance, questions about my social life, suggestions about career opportunities that involve working closely with him. How does David respond when his father makes those kinds of comments? He doesn't respond. I think he's so used to his father's behavior that he doesn't recognize when it crosses boundaries. We spent 2 hours discussing the implications of what she had learned and her options for addressing her concerns. She could confront David with this information and demand that he acknowledge the problems with his father's conduct. She could proceed with the wedding while establishing clear boundaries about her interactions with Richard. She could delay the wedding until she had more time to evaluate the family dynamics and David's willingness to protect her from his father's behavior. Or she could end the engagement if she concluded that marrying into this family would put her at unacceptable risk.
What do you think I should do? She asked. I think you should take some time to process this information and then have a very serious conversation with David about your concerns. His response will tell you everything you need to know about whether he can be trusted to protect you from his family's dysfunction. And if he can't? Then you'll need to decide whether your love for David is worth the risks of joining a family that operates this way. The conversation with David was a disaster.
When Jasmine presented him with the information about his father's business and legal problems, his reaction was immediate defensiveness, followed by anger that she had been investigating his family. Jasmine, these are old allegations that were resolved years ago. My father is a successful businessman who has been targeted by competitors and disgruntled employees who are looking for paydays from lawsuits.
David, these aren't just old allegations. Some of this involves ongoing business practices that are ethically questionable and potentially illegal. According to whom? According to competitors who want to damage our company's reputation? According to SEC filings, court documents, and news reports from credible journalists. Journalists who were fed information by people with agendas against my family. Jasmine realized that David had been trained to dismiss any criticism of his father as motivated by jealousy, competition, or malicious intent. He couldn't acknowledge that the pattern of allegations might reflect real problems with Richard's conduct. David, I'm not asking you to denounce your father. I'm asking you to acknowledge that there are legitimate concerns about his behavior and to help me understand how you would protect me from any inappropriate conduct. Protect you from what? My father has never done anything inappropriate toward you.
He makes comments about my appearance and asks personal questions that make me uncomfortable. He's being friendly. He's trying to get to know his future daughter-in-law. David, I need you to understand that some of his behavior feels inappropriate to me, and I need to know that you would support me if I ever needed to set boundaries with him. You're asking me to choose between you and my family based on paranoid interpretations of normal social interactions. I'm asking you to prioritize my comfort and safety over your family's expectations. And I'm asking you to trust my judgment about my own family rather than believing rumors and allegations that have been investigated and resolved. The conversation ended with David defending his father and dismissing Jasmine's concerns as paranoid and unfair. He made it clear that he would not acknowledge problems with his father's conduct or commit to protecting Jasmine from inappropriate behavior.
That night, Jasmine called me in tears. Mom, I don't think David can see his father clearly. He's been trained to defend him regardless of evidence or legitimate concerns. How do you feel about that? I feel like I'm about to marry someone who will always choose his family's interests over my safety and comfort. What do you want to do? I think I need to end the engagement. It was a heartbreaking decision, but I was proud of Jasmine for recognizing that she couldn't marry someone who wouldn't protect her from his family's dysfunction. But ending the engagement 3 days before the wedding created a crisis that would test every professional skill I had developed over 25 years of managing complex family situations. The logistical challenges of canceling a wedding 3 days in advance were enormous. 300 guests had already traveled to San Francisco. The venue, catering, music, and photography had been paid for and couldn't be canceled without substantial financial penalties. Wedding gifts had been delivered and would need to be returned. Family members on both sides would need to be notified and would undoubtedly demand explanations. But the social and political implications were even more complex. Richard Kensington had planned to use the wedding as a campaign launch event. Canceling the celebration would not only embarrass the family, but could also damage his political ambitions by suggesting that he couldn't manage his own family relationships. The Kensington family's initial response to news of the broken engagement was predictably focused on damage control rather than concern for Jasmine's well-being. Catherine called me within hours of learning about Jasmine's decision.
Emily, we need to discuss how to handle this situation with minimal disruption to the families and guests. The situation is that your son and my daughter have ended their engagement. There's no way to handle that without disruption. There are ways to manage the public messaging to protect everyone's reputation and privacy. I'm not concerned about managing public messaging. I'm concerned about supporting my daughter through a difficult decision.
Your daughter has made a decision that will embarrass both families and cause significant financial losses for everyone involved. My daughter has made a decision that protects her from marrying into a family that doesn't respect her concerns or prioritize her safety. Safety, Emily, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about the pattern of allegations against your husband and the family's refusal to acknowledge legitimate concerns about his conduct. There was a long silence on the phone before Catherine responded with carefully controlled anger. I don't know what kind of research you've been doing, but you are making very serious accusations based on information you don't understand. I'm making observations based on public records and documented legal proceedings. You are repeating lies and rumors that have been spread by people who wanted to damage my family. I'm sharing factual information that my daughter has a right to know before joining your family. Your daughter is making a terrible mistake based on your family's response to her legitimate concerns. My daughter is making an informed decision based on your family's response to her legitimate concerns.
The conversation ended with Catherine threatening legal action if I continued to spread false allegations about her family. It was exactly the kind of intimidation tactic that I had read about in the legal documents describing Richard's pattern of silencing critics. But the threat also confirmed that I had made the right decision to research the family and share the information with Jasmine. A family that responded to legitimate concerns with legal threats was not a family that would respect Jasmine's autonomy or protect her interests. The next challenge was managing the wedding cancellation in a way that minimized harm to everyone involved while protecting Jasmine from further manipulation or retaliation. As a professional wedding planner, I had experience with last-minute cancellations due to family emergencies, military deployments, and relationship problems, but I had never managed a cancellation that involved this level of political and social complexity. The guest notification process required careful coordination to ensure that people learned about the cancellation from official sources rather than gossip or media reports. I worked with Wellington Events to develop a communication strategy that would reach all 300 guests quickly and professionally.
The venue and vendor cancellations required delicate negotiations to minimize financial penalties while maintaining professional relationships that I might need for future events. The St. Francis Yacht Club was gracious about allowing us to convert the wedding reception into a thank you celebration for out-of-town guests who had already traveled to San Francisco. But the family dynamics were the most challenging aspect of the situation. David was devastated by Jasmine's decision and alternated between begging her to reconsider and expressing anger about the false allegations that had influenced her choice. He refused to acknowledge that his family's response to her concerns had been the primary factor in her decision to end the engagement. Richard and Catherine were focused on controlling the narrative around the cancellation to minimize damage to their reputation and political ambitions. They wanted to present the broken engagement as a mutual decision based on incompatibility rather than as Jasmine's rejection of their family's conduct. My own extended family was confused and concerned about the sudden cancellation, but they rallied around Jasmine with support and understanding once they learned about the circumstances that had led to her decision.
The most difficult conversation was with Jasmine herself, who was struggling with grief over losing the man she had loved and relief about escaping a family situation that had become increasingly problematic. "Mom, do you think I made the right decision?" she asked me the night before what would have been her wedding day. "I think you made the decision that protects your long-term safety and autonomy. That's always the right decision, even when it's painful." "But I love David. I wanted to marry him." "You love the David you thought you knew, the David who had put your safety and comfort ahead of his family's expectations. But that David does not exist.
The real David will always choose his family's interests over yours. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm giving up the love of my life because I'm being paranoid about his father?
Jasmine, you asked David to acknowledge your concerns and protect you from inappropriate behavior. He refused. That tells you everything you need to know about how he would handle future conflicts between you and his family. I just wish things could have been different. I know, but you can't change other people's character or priorities. You can only protect yourself from people who won't prioritize your well-being. The day that would have been Jasmine's wedding day was both sad and liberating. Instead of a formal celebration, we had a small gathering of close family and friends who wanted to support her through the transition. But the story doesn't end with the canceled wedding. 3 months later, I received information that confirmed how right Jasmine had been to end her engagement to David. A former Kensington Pharmaceuticals employee contacted me through my business website, saying that she had information about the family that I should know given my daughter's previous engagement to David. I heard through mutual contacts that your daughter had been engaged to David Kensington and that the engagement was broken, she said during a confidential phone conversation. I wanted you to know that she made the right decision.
What do you mean? I worked for the company for 3 years and had multiple interactions with Richard Kensington. His behavior toward young women employees was consistently inappropriate and sometimes escalated to harassment and intimidation. Did you report his behavior? I reported it to HR and was told that the company would investigate. Instead of investigating, they transferred me to a different department and made my work environment so hostile that I eventually quit. Did other employees have similar experiences? Several women had problems with Richard's conduct, but most were afraid to report it because they had seen what happened to people who complained. The company has a pattern of retaliating against employees who raise concerns about the family's behavior. Why are you telling me this now?
Because I want you to know that your daughter's instincts were correct. Marrying into that family would have put her at risk. And David has been trained to protect his father rather than protect anyone who raises concerns about his conduct. The conversation confirmed everything that Jasmine and I had suspected about the Kensington family dynamics and David's inability to prioritize her safety over his family's reputation. 6 months after the canceled wedding, I received another piece of information that validated Jasmine's decision. Richard Kensington's political campaign was derailed when a major news organization published an investigative report about Kensington Pharmaceuticals' business practices and Richard's personal conduct. The report included interviews with former employees, business partners, and associates who detailed a pattern of unethical and potentially illegal behavior spanning decades. The investigation revealed that the Kensington family had used wealth, political connections, and legal intimidation to silence critics and avoid accountability for conduct that included fraud, harassment, and abuse of power.
David's response to the scandal was exactly what Jasmine would have expected. He defended his father, dismissed the allegations as politically motivated, and attacked the credibility of the people who had come forward with information. Can you imagine what would have happened if I had married him? Jasmine asked when we discussed the news reports. I would have been expected to defend Richard's conduct and attack the women who were brave enough to speak out against him. You would have been tracked in a family that demanded loyalty over integrity. And if I had refused to defend him, I would have faced the same retaliation and intimidation that his other critics experienced. Exactly. You saved yourself from years of abuse and manipulation. A year later, Jasmine met Marcus Thompson, a public defender who shared her values and supported her independence. Their relationship was built on mutual respect,
honest communication, and genuine partnership rather than family expectations and social obligations. When they announced their engagement 2 years later, I was thrilled to plan a wedding that was truly about celebrating their love rather than advancing anyone's political or business interests. The contrast between the two weddings was remarkable. Jasmine and Marcus chose to have an intimate ceremony at a botanical garden in Berkeley with 50 guests who genuinely cared about their relationship rather than hundreds of political contacts seeking networking opportunities. The planning process was collaborative and joyful, with decisions made based on the couple's preferences rather than family expectations or social obligations. Marcus's family welcomed Jasmine warmly and treated me with respect as both a professional and as their future daughter-in-law's mother. Most importantly, when small conflicts arose during the planning process, Marcus consistently supported Jasmine's preferences and worked to find solutions that made her comfortable, rather than demanding that she accommodate his family's expectations. This is what a healthy relationship looks like, I told Jasmine, as we finalized the details for her second engagement celebration. This is what it means to marry someone who will protect you, rather than expect you to sacrifice yourself for his family's comfort.
I can't believe I almost settled for something so much less than this, she replied. I thought love meant accepting whatever treatment David's family chose to give me. Love means demanding respect and receiving it willingly. If you have to fight for basic respect, that's not love, that's negotiation. The wedding was beautiful, personal, and genuinely celebratory. No one used the occasion to advance political ambitions or business interests. No one felt manipulated or used. No one had to sacrifice their principles or safety for the sake of family harmony. 3 years later, Jasmine and Marcus have built a partnership based on mutual support, honest communication, and shared values. They both work in public interest law, fighting for justice and accountability in ways that would have been impossible if Jasmine had married into a family that demanded loyalty over integrity. Meanwhile, the Kensington family continues to face legal and political consequences for decades of unethical conduct. Richard's political ambitions were permanently derailed by the investigative reporting that exposed his business practices and personal behavior. David has struggled to rebuild his life after defending his father's conduct became publicly untenable. But perhaps the most important outcome of this experience is that Jasmine learned to trust her instincts about people and relationships rather than dismissing her concerns for the sake of social expectations or family pressure. "Mom," she said during our last conversation about the Kensington situation, "thank you for doing the research that helped me understand what I was really getting into. Thank you for supporting my decision to end the engagement, even when it was painful and complicated. Thank you for having the courage to choose your safety and integrity over social convenience and family expectations. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had gone through with the wedding? I think you would have spent years trying to manage an impossible situation while gradually losing yourself in the process. You would have been expected to defend the indefensible and sacrifice your principles for the sake of family loyalty. And eventually, I would have become someone I didn't recognize or respect." Exactly. You saved yourself from that fate by choosing to trust your instincts and prioritize your long-term well-being over short-term social comfort. The experience taught me important lessons about my role as both a mother and a professional. As a wedding planner, my job is to create celebrations that reflect couples' values and priorities, rather than their family's expectations or social obligations. As a mother, my job is to provide my daughter with information and support that helps her make decisions that protect her safety and autonomy. Sometimes those responsibilities conflict
with social expectations about family harmony and wedding traditions. But protecting the people you love is more important than maintaining comfortable illusions about family dynamics or social relationships. The secret I discovered 3 days before Jasmine's original wedding wasn't just about Richard Kensington's conduct. It was about the entire family's willingness to prioritize reputation over integrity, loyalty over accountability, and social advantage over personal safety. Some secrets are too dangerous to keep, and some families hide things that should never see daylight. In this case, bringing those secrets into the light saved my daughter from years of manipulation, abuse, and moral compromise. The choice between her happiness and her safety turned out to be a false choice. Real happiness requires safety, respect, and the freedom to maintain your integrity even when it conflicts with other people's expectations. Jasmine chose safety, and in doing so, she found genuine happiness with someone who values her strength rather than demanding that she diminish herself for his comfort. As a wedding planner, I've seen many couples struggle with family dynamics, financial pressures, and social expectations that threaten to overshadow the joy of their celebration. The most successful weddings are those where couples maintain focus on their relationship and their values rather than trying to please everyone else. The most successful marriages are those where partners protect each other from family dysfunction rather than expecting each other to endure abuse for the sake of harmony. My business has grown significantly since Jasmine's experience with the Kensington family. Word is spread through professional networks that I'm a wedding planner who will research family backgrounds, identify potential problems, and help couples navigate complex family dynamics with integrity and safety. I now specialize in working with couples who are dealing with controlling families, ethical conflicts, or safety concerns related to their wedding planning and marriage decisions. My experience with the Kensington situation has given me expertise in recognizing red flags and helping people make informed decisions about family relationships. I've also developed partnerships with legal professionals, financial advisors, and counselors who can provide additional support for couples facing family manipulation, financial abuse, or safety threats. The work is more complex and emotionally demanding than traditional wedding planning, but it's also more meaningful. I'm helping people protect themselves and their relationships from forces that could destroy their happiness and safety. 6 months ago, I received a call from a young woman whose situation was remarkably similar to Jasmine's original engagement.
Miss Foster, she said during our initial consultation, I'm engaged to someone from a very prominent family, and I'm starting to have concerns about their business practices and the way they treat people who disagree with them. I heard that you helped your own daughter navigate a similar situation. What kind of concerns are you having? My fiance's family expects me to be involved in their business and political activities, but some of their practices seem unethical. When I ask questions or express concerns, they dismiss me as naive or uninformed. How does your fiancé respond when you express concerns? He says I'm overthinking things and that I should trust his family's judgment rather than questioning their methods. Have you considered that this pattern might continue after you're married? That's exactly what I'm afraid of. I'm worried that marrying him means accepting their values and practices, even when they conflict with my own principles.
We spent 2 hours discussing her concerns and developing a plan for gathering information about her fiancé's family and evaluating her options for protecting herself from potential manipulation or retaliation. The research revealed a pattern of business practices and personal conduct that was remarkably similar to what I had discovered about the Kensington family. The young woman chose to end her engagement rather than marry into a family that demanded loyalty over integrity.
It was the hardest decision I've ever made, she told me 6 months later, but it was also the decision that saved my life. I can't imagine what would have happened if I had married someone who expected me to defend unethical conduct and attack people who spoke out against his family. These experiences have convinced me that there are many families who use wealth, social status, and political connections to avoid accountability for conduct that ranges from unethical to criminal. They often target young women who are vulnerable to manipulation through romantic relationships or family pressure. My role as a wedding planner has evolved to include helping people recognize these dynamics and protect themselves from families who see marriage as an opportunity to gain control over vulnerable individuals.
The work requires careful investigation, strategic thinking, and emotional support for people who are facing the difficult choice between love and safety. But it's work that can literally save lives by helping people escape from abusive family systems before they become trapped by marriage, children, or financial dependence. I've learned that some secrets are too dangerous to keep, and some families hide things that should never see daylight. But I've also learned that knowledge is power, and people who have accurate information about family dynamics can make informed decisions that protect their safety and integrity. The most important lesson from Jasmine's experience is that trust should be earned through consistent behavior rather than assumed based on family reputation or social status. People who truly love and respect you will welcome your questions and concerns rather than dismissing them as paranoid or disloyal. If someone demands that you choose between your safety and their approval, choose your safety. If someone expects you to sacrifice your principles for their comfort, protect your principles. If someone uses love as leverage to control your decisions, that's not love, that's manipulation.
Real love enhances your autonomy rather than undermining it. Real love supports your integrity rather than demanding that you compromise it. Real love protects you from danger rather than exposing you to it for the sake of social or financial advantage. Jasmine learned these lessons before it was too late to change course. She chose safety, integrity, and genuine partnership over social status, financial security, and the illusion of love that would have eventually destroyed her. 3 days before her original wedding, I discovered that some secrets are too dangerous to keep. But the most important discovery was that my daughter had the courage to act on difficult information rather than pretending that dangerous realities didn't exist. That courage saved her from years of abuse, manipulation, and moral compromise. It gave her the opportunity to find genuine love with someone who values her strength rather than demanding her submission. And it taught both of us that protecting the people you love sometimes requires difficult decisions that challenge social expectations and family traditions.
But those difficult decisions are always worth making when they protect safety, autonomy, and the integrity that makes life worth living. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments. Have you ever discovered information about someone that forced you to choose between love and safety? How do you balance family loyalty with personal integrity when they conflict? Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable dangerous behavior, even when that refusal causes pain for people you care about.